Ba-ba. Hello there, a new channel, a new chapter, and with Halloween around the corner, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite horror movies, one I've constantly rewatched and enjoyed since I was a kid, namely 1982's Creepshow. First off, this video is part tribute, part review, so as will be the case for all movie recommendations in this channel, if you've not watched it yet, please go and do so first, then come back and watch this. There will be spoilers. So, this film isn't a horror in the purest sense. It's not meant to terrify. It's not really meant to shock. It's a tribute to the great horror comics like Crypt of Terror, which was later renamed to Tales from the Crypt, The Vault of Horror, shock, suspense stories, those kind of things, which inspired so many horror writers and filmmakers. And indeed, that's who you get working on this project. A screenplay by Stephen King. It's directed by George Romero and featuring the work of effects wizard Tom Savini. This is a who's who of modern horror, all brought together to pay tribute to the medium that helped spark their careers. And you can see the reverence on the screen with a perfect capturing of the comic book aesthetic, from the way each story in the anthology is introduced and ending with the turning of pages, even showing some of those mail-order ads for tat-like X-ray specs that help fund them. Clearly, a lot of people were also ready for a horror-related nostalgia trip. The film was a box office success by horror standards, grossing $21 million in the United States, and even enjoying a brief spell at number one in the box office, knocking Sylvester Stallone's vehicle First Blood off from the top spot. The film's tone didn't really chime with a lot of reviewers at the time. Many didn't understand why there were so many instances of dumb humor that were included in something that was marketed as a horror film.
I never saw such rotten crap in my life. Where do you get this shit? Who sells it to you?
But personally, I think the goofiness is why the film holds up today as a fun experience. It's something you can just put on, watch with friends while having a few drinks. You're not going to miss any major plot points in the first two stories, and then it's going to draw you in the better parts of the anthology coming later in the movie. And I won't lie, the movie doesn't start strong at all in terms of story. The first piece, Father's Day, is easily the worst part of the anthology for me. A simple tale of revenge that doesn't even seem to convey a message beyond assholes always win. It's pretty rough to power through. Fortunately, it's unintentionally hilarious. Some old cunt who looks like Bernie Sanders treated his family like shit while he was alive.
You're nothing but a
It's not just a matter of sitting in a chair, smashing his cane, and demanding that he's waited on hand and foot. Anyone who interferes with his family doing anything other than dedicating themselves to him is quickly bumped off, like his daughter Bedelia's elderly boyfriend who gets shot during a mysterious hunting accident. Basically, this guy has the appearance of Bernie Sanders, but the personality of Hillary Clinton. And vastly wealthy, also like Bernie Sanders, don't tell the socialists. He leverages loyalty by threatening to cut everyone out of the will, while simultaneously calling all his family vultures for only sticking around because of the will. And above all, you know what it is this withered old bastard likes best? Cake.
It's Father's Day. Where's my cake?
This motherfucker loves cake. Every Father's Day, he demands one. And the last person who loved cake this much got a pay raise from Netflix for one of the worst comedy specials ever produced. Anyway, this prompts his daughter to smash his brains in with an ashtray, cover up the killing, and make the whole family wealthy in the process. And they decide to all gather together in the family mansion on Father's Day to celebrate the fact that Bernie's dead, and they're all balling out of control with their newfound money. And I mean, they're seriously balling out of control, by the way. Look at this dancing by Ed Harris and his girlfriend. Just watch how he even turns down the radio when asked, incorporating it into the dance. This is clearly someone with fuck you money. Bedelia is turned into an alcoholic, of course. She goes to the grave to pay tribute to her father with some expository dialogue about how she got away with the murder and how much being called a bitch hurt her feelings. And she's really hamming it up in this scene.
I want my cake, Bedelia! You bitch! You called me a bitch! Sylvia fixed it all! Ashtray back in place, chair overturned.
In fact, the last person this hammy got a pay raise from Netflix for one of the worst comedy specials ever produced. It's not explained why, but all this seems to bring her dad back from the dead, and he immediately chokes her to death, demanding that he get his fucking Father's Day cake. And that's what I mean. It's just, he really loves cake. And is that the point of the story? You know, I don't know.
It's Father's Day.
It's fucking stupid. It's also compounded by one of the stupidest slow deaths ever committed to a horror movie. Ed Harris goes out into the graveyard, the family plot, to look for Bedelia, and he trips over into a grave. And while he's lying there trying to figure out what's going on, the headstone is slowly pulled out above him by Bernie Sanders, who's now got telekinetic powers for some reason, and he doesn't move, and then eventually his head gets squashed. So Bernie then walks into the house. He screams about how he wants his cake, does the old classic 180-degree neck snap on Cruella de Vil here, and then decides to turn her head into a Father's Day cake for himself with candles and all, which again doesn't make sense, because if you love cake, that's not cake, is it? That's a severed human head. So yeah, it's just as well that it is funny, because I'm not even sure what the story is supposed to be saying. It's just a bunch of bad shit happening to people who engaged in some not as bad shit, and the power of cake brings people back from the dead. I don't know. It's pretty dumb, but if you don't laugh at any point during this, there's probably something wrong with you. In fact, this story is so funny, you can probably expect Amy Schumer to plagiarize parts of it for her next Netflix special. So we move into the next story, the lonesome death of Jordi Verrill, and this is still pretty bad, but it's marginally better, I think, than Father's Day. You know, on the one hand, the story is shorter, it doesn't have any of that clunky expository dialogue, but on the other hand, it's pretty much a one-man show from Stephen King, who is certainly no actor. Why he had to be in the movie, I don't know, but this was 1982, so he's ripped to the tits on cocaine. Fuck it, he probably doesn't even remember being in the film.
Holy old Jesus!
This story pays homage to The Blob, which taught us all not to go poking around meteorites. Jordi Verrill is a redneck who lives out in the sticks, who thinks that the meteorite that landed in his backyard could net him the vast sum of $200.
How does $50 sound? Not a cent less. $200.
Verrill, who constantly reminds us that he has been unlucky his whole life, finally thinks his big break has arrived. This is part of the reason why I like the writing in this story. This guy basically fucks his entire life up for $200 because he doesn't really know how to dream much bigger than that. He just sits around his cabin all day drinking homemade hooch. I'm sure King had to do a lot of preparation for this role. Now, Verrill is such a fuck-up that not only does he touch the scorching hot meteorite, he also then breaks it in half by trying to cool it down, leaving his dreams of paying back that bank loan in tatters. He takes a look at his fingers and realizes they are green with plant matter growing out of them. Now, look, I'm not a redneck living in a cabin in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, but I still probably would have considered this a medical emergency, yet Jordi mind fucks himself out of getting the local doctor involved because he doesn't want to have his fingers amputated. Least of his worries, because in the next scene, he's got meteor shit all over his face. Taking the manly approach to healthcare by trying to drink away his worries with a bottle of vodka, he falls asleep only to wake up and find himself looking like that motherfucker from Duck Dynasty. He also finds himself with a raging case of green dick, the first person to get it without going to Thailand.
Oh no! Not there!
He's itching all over, and the plant life that has taken over his body is telling him that it's thirsty and he has to get in the bath. So a vision of his dead father appears in the mirror, played by the same actor who played the university professor and doctor in Jordi's previous two visions, and tells him that he absolutely must not get in the bath or he's going to die for sure. And I'm not certain if from this I'm supposed to think he could have lived or not, that the grass would have died if he not water it, would it have sucked all the water out of his body eventually. It's not as if this is going to get answered between a ghost and an idiot, because Jordi jumps into the bath anyway.
Oh, better. Oh, that's lots better.
In the final scene, he's now more vegetable than man and clearly can't take the change anymore, so he reaches over for a shotgun and begs God to let his impending suicide be successful. "Let my luck be in just this once," he says, before pulling the trigger and blowing what's left of his brains out the back of his skull. Short, to the point, the story is about how some people just get the shitty end of the stick their entire lives. And in the final shots, we can see the cabin and the entire building and field surrounding it are now covered in green alien plant life, and it's spreading. A guy on the radio says that there will be torrential rain, the likes of which has never been seen before, which means soon everyone will be coming down with green dick.
Oh, no, not there.
And it's also only 37 miles from Oregon, so the story has a happy ending because the alien life will wipe Portland off the face of the earth. The film begins in earnest here with a truly great story, something to tide you over, one that exudes a genuinely creepy atmosphere and a stellar performance from Leslie Nielsen. God, how I miss that rubber-faced goon. Whenever I think about my personal favorite roles of his, sure, there's Airplane, Police Squad, and all of that, but I think of this, his playing of a wealthy villain called Richard Vickers. It's just a departure from his usual comedic turns, and he absolutely fucking nails it. A jealous husband who finds out that his wife is cheating on him with Ted Danson, which is a very clear upgrade, all things considered. He lures Danson to a secluded beach by playing him a recording of his wife asking for him to come and save her from an as-of-yet unspecified fate.
Please, Harry, please come.
I had to stop it there. I couldn't bear to record anymore.
It's a great premise. It's one that's similar in setup to the 1988 film The Vanishing, and it's mostly played straight at the beginning. Nielsen has so many great one-liners over the course of this story, his comedic timing coming into great effect, convincing us completely that he is a psychopath.
It may be on some subjects that I'm not entirely sane. The subject of what is mine, for example. I am not sane at all.
There's a tense build-up, and when it becomes apparent that Becky's not at the beach, Nielsen draws his gun and makes Ted Danson dig a hole in the sand and bury himself up to his neck. "I just want to incapacitate you," he says, and then you can see Becky. Now, I'll just use this point to talk about the score in the movie. The soundtrack is amazing. Piano and synth coming together. It's really unique, and it's almost ever-present across the movie without ever being too intrusive. It was thrown together by John Harrison, who was an admirer of George Romero, who was given the opportunity to become assistant director on this movie and 1985's Day of the Dead, which he would also do the soundtrack for. And this soundtrack nearly didn't happen. The original plan was to use 1950s period music, but they kept struggling to find high-quality recordings that they wanted to use. So in the end, Harrison, from nowhere, volunteered to write the soundtrack from scratch, despite having never scored a film before. I mean, just listen to some of this shit. And during this story, I think the score does some of its best work, even adding a sinister tone to the classic Camptown races. The background music is sort of brilliantly linked to what's going on in the story. Why does the Camptown races sound so sinister? Why play it at all? Well, in one scene, Nielsen's character is whistling it. So it's like the soundtrack in this story is his character's mindset. Later, when paranoia is setting in, he can hear an eerie wailing of a woman's voice in the distance. Anyway, the score is awesome, and you can get a copy of it from Waxwork Records, who put it out on vinyl after they managed to track down the master tapes of the recording in a warehouse in Pittsburgh. Back to the story, and now with Ted Danson buried up to his chin in sand and nearly getting a case of the crabs, Richard brings a TV and electrical output down to the beach. He sets it up in front of Harry's face, and on it is footage of Becky also buried up to her chin in the sand. Now for her, the tide is starting to come in and the water is splashing in her face, and gleefully it's pointed out that it's live footage, that she is further down the beach. And that's when the penny drops that Leslie Nielsen is a fucking psycho. He's going to not only drown both of you, but he's going to make the guy watch first. And the relish with which he does it, explaining that if you can hold your breath, there's a chance the tide might set you free, describing the fate that awaits both of them, it's great. It's also got a great shot right at the end when Ted Danson's head is underwater and he's holding his breath. I think he explained how they did it in a 2015 interview. This was actually a much more complicated shot than you would believe. So, the theme with a lot of these stories is revenge and just desserts, except Yordi Verrill. Fuck knows what he did to anybody. The story doesn't end there, and so we get zombies. Water zombies who can teleport Voorhees style behind locked doors. They take Richard down to the beach and put him in the ground with the tide rolling in, and he gets to scream the immortal line, "I can hold my breath for a long time," and we leave it there with him waiting to die. So, the film is now starting to hit its stride, and the next story keeps us on a high point. The Crate has some fantastic performances in it, primarily Adrienne Barbeau as one of the greatest bitches ever committed to screen in the form of Wilma, Call Me Billy Northup.
Oh, just call me Billy. Everyone does.
This might be a career standout performance for her, or maybe that is in Cannibal Women in the Avocado Jungle of Death. Yes, that's a real movie. And in addition to her, the esteemed Hal Holbrook plays her husband Henry, the literal embodiment of a cuckold, spending his time pandering to Billy's every whim, all the while fantasizing about how great it would be to kill her and set himself free from the tyranny he lives under. He doesn't, of course, and instead he has to watch her get drunk, flirt with, and offend everyone he's invited to his dinner parties. It's not clear how these two even get fucking married, honestly. The couple's as dysfunctional as Whitney and Bobby. But one of his professor friends finds an old crate that dates back to 1834 under the stairs of the university they work in. What's inside? Well, it's not someone's old porn stash. It's actually a monster from the Arctic that was shipped back, presumably for further investigation, but then it has been forgotten about for 150 years. And it turns out it's pretty pissed off and hungry, and rather than wait around for someone to give it a Snickers, it has the janitor for starters. Some more great overacting in this scene. The professor becomes a gibbering wreck and tries to get the attention of the oldest student in America. Like, seriously, this motherfucker looks about 45 years old, and all the combing forward in the world won't change that, my friend. So naturally, that guy's next on the menu. This story probably contains the best example of Savini's practical effects work, as it's the goriest of the 5 stories. The prop monster, which was actually a handheld puppet, if you can believe it, was named Fluffy on the set, and it recently got a makeover after falling on hard times. I haven't seen anyone age this badly since Donatella Versace. Now in shock, the professor goes to Henry, who, while initially skeptical, doesn't hear a tale of a monster that needs to be put down. Rather, he sees a solution to his marital problems. Sometimes it takes a monster to kill a monster, and so Henry decides to lure Billy to the crate with the hopes that Fluffy will issue a swift divorce. I won't spoil the ending, but it's certainly as happy a one as you're going to get on Creepshow. Which brings us to the final chapter. One that, if you don't like insects, it is sure to make your skin crawl. It's called They're Creeping Up on You. Now, over the course of the movie, if you want to get super analytical, you'll notice each story explores sort of major, traditional psychological fears. The first story explores guilt and the karmic rewards for bad deeds. The second is a fear of disease. The third is a fear of drowning. The crate is about being trapped in bad relationships. The real monster of the story being the one in the marital bed rather than the box under the stairs. This final story is something more primal and simple, and that's just the fear of insects, although the story does explore some more interesting themes as it sets up for its big gross-out finale.
Get them bugs. I own this goddamn building. There's not gonna be any more damn bugs.
So, Upson Pratt is a billionaire who lives in a literal ivory tower. You'll notice the completely white environment within which he resides, and it also serves as a sterile environment for him to live in. You see, most likely in a nod to Howard Hughes, Pratt is a germaphobe who views people much like the bugs he seeks to avoid. Spray them, kill them, stamp them out. He sits all day in his apartment watching computers spit out stock prices and profits. His bank balance is the only thing he is more obsessed about than bugs. You did well, he tells an employee. Go out and fuck someone. Only wear a damn rubber. Everyone's got the herpes these days. Forcing through a hostile takeover of a rival business, he drives its owner to suicide, and the widow decides to call Pratt and give him a piece of her mind. Naturally, he actually enjoys being told about his rival's final moments, and even tells her that her husband deserved it for being stupid.
Would you mind telling me who gave you my private number? I'd like to fire him.
It was in my husband's address book, you son of a bitch.
Well, I can't fire him, can I?
Also worth noting, just in case you thought he couldn't be any more unpleasant, he's also a pretty unapologetic racist, as you can see from this interaction with a janitor here.
I might be able to get Pirelli Brothers out here by, shall we say, 11:30?
You might go far, White.
I've noticed that in service jobs, people like yourself often do. People of color. Yes, 11:30 would be fine.
So there are lots of people with reasons to hate Upson Pratt. Brilliant name, by the way. And whether or not it's a curse, it's not clear. But slowly and surely, there's this single cockroach he's been chasing around the apartment, which, over the course of the story, suddenly multiplies into more and more. To give you an idea of how many cockroaches we used, Tom Savini ordered 20,000 cockroaches to be delivered to the set for this part of the movie, and that actually wasn't enough for the final scene. They had to pad it out with raisins and other stuff to give the illusion of there being more. Now, as a metaphor, there is a lot going on here, something that I'm sure the good hashtag resistance will approve of. Pratt represents wealth and capitalism being killed by the things he labels as vermin. There's multiple comparisons of people to insects over the course of the dialogue, even going so far as to give the janitor he was racist towards bug-like eyes through the viewing lens and an insect-like voice as his overly polite tone is distorted through a microphone. Yes, yes, rise up and eat the rich, my little roaches. And that's where Creepshow wraps up with that awful image. But certainly not an awful film, not in my opinion. It's a horror comedy with some truly memorable moments and an ensemble cast. It's a true cult movie in the sense that despite many average reviews, it has endured, and there was a new Blu-ray release that came out just this month with a ton of previously unseen features that I'm probably going to get hold of. The movie would go on to spawn 2 sequels, the second being hilariously bad and the third just being bad. And yeah, I think this is just a great film. It's one of my personal favorites, honestly, from the 80s. It does get lost amid so many great classics from that decade, which is understandable because we really had an embarrassment of riches. But there are a few such earnest love letters to the genre. And if you like horror, you'll recognize that immediately. Anyway, if you watch the movie, stick a comment down below, and we'll see you next time. Happy Halloween.